Good morning. Hello, everyone. It's really great to be here this morning. And it's also fantastic to see a full room with open source and free software community, digital commons, people that are helping to build an alternative in Europe, which is more in line with our democratic values and principles. And congratulations to the European Commission to make this happen. I think it's a great milestone. So in my presentation, I will focus on, of course, the opportunities for this, but also the challenges that we're facing. And of course, this is a moment where we are dealing with a poly-crisis. It has been 3 years of crisis after crisis. Many experts talk about this multiplicity of crises that we have to address at the same time. Think about the climate emergency, think about wars and the Ukraine wars now in Palestine, the energy crisis with energy prices that is making life of people very difficult and the price of life much higher, inflation, jobs, migration. So many things that keep people also awake at night. But the EU and Europe together has a very strong role. We have seen it during COVID. We are also seeing it as a response to the economic emergency, to the social emergency. And of course, we see it also in our next generation EU agenda. And some of it was mentioned before. I think we have these two pillars that are the twin transitions, becoming climate neutral with the European Green Deal, which I think it's a priority for the planet, and then a digital transition that is done in a way to keep us sovereign, open, and democratic. So building back better, but also, really using these very, I think also sad and difficult times for not coming back to how it was before. So looking at the future, a different future that is better, that is carbon neutral, that is digital, but also more democratic. So we have also key technological trends. I mean, of course, here I see a room full of technology experts, and I'm sure we're going to discuss them in the panels. But many of those technological trends, if we look at the chip wars, and we saw also that during COVID, the vulnerability of supply chains and how, if we don't have chips, this will affect key sectors and key strategic sectors of the economy and society. If we look at generative AI and how the field and the market is being shaped as we speak, and before we heard about the need for an AI Act and regulation in a market that's creating a new concentration of power, a lot of opportunities, but also very high risks. And of course, for example, quantum supremacy. I mean, here I didn't mention all. I mean, we could talk about the 5G growth. We could talk about others, cybersecurity, and so on. But definitely, I think also those technological trends, they have a strong impact when it comes to geopolitics, when it comes to economic and industrial sovereignty, and obviously also political and military sovereignty. And I think for policymakers, also a lot of challenges, because it's becoming very hard to govern and regulate these technologies. And sometimes it's even very difficult to know how to intervene if you want to regulate it. And as we know, technologies cannot be invented. So we need also to change the way we think about regulating, of course, for the benefit of all of us, but at the same time, enabling innovation and making sure we can actually do it. You know this map, so I'll be quick here. But obviously, as I spoke about the geopolitical, economic, and industrial challenges of this technological revolution, Europe is not doing very well there. I mean, we have a world that's polarized. We have the big tech in the US, in Silicon Valley. We have the Chinese big tech. We have other regions that are kind of emerging as technology champions. And Europe still is very small. So we know what this means. We know dependence, of course, on foreign technology providers, on foreign technologies companies. And this also means vulnerability. I mean, the impossibility of having our own homemade tech. I mean, a technology that's made in Europe and that's aligned with our values and our principles. As an economist, being worked on the digital economy for more than a decade, I will say, a lot of economists talk about also a business model that's unsustainable. Data extractivism from the GAFAM, but also, algorithmic rents. So all these companies that are able to amass all the data, fueling artificial intelligence engines in the hands of very few companies. I think we have around 5 or 7 companies controlling the digital economy and being evaluated more than national states. So that is where the question of sovereignty becomes very important. But also, as you see, the parallel with extractivism, the fossil fuel extractivism, maybe not a good business model for our sustainable future. And this is what Professor Shoshana Zuboff, emeritus professor at Harvard Business School, calls surveillance capitalism, as you know. Under surveillance capitalism, she says, you're not the customer or even the product. You are the raw material. So now, what is Europe's response to this situation? And I have to say, I think we are doing a lot at this moment. Maybe not enough, and that's why we gather all here to see what is our alternative future, how do we build it together, what do we need also to make it happen. But definitely the 2030 digital decade that was mentioned before is an ambitious roadmap. And I think it was a long time that Europe didn't talk about a digital industrial strategy, didn't talk about a digital pathways in such ambitious manner. And I think we all know that this is not only about accelerating digitization. Accelerating digitization is not enough. We also need to shape the direction towards social and environmental sustainability. And I think here we have an opportunity to show that the European way to innovation will be really putting people first, which also means addressing the big societal and environmental and economic challenges we are facing in the future. So people first, and giving a direction to this technological future will be our task. Europe is the first continent that has a digital rights and principle chart. This was signed by all member states, and I think it's a great achievement because it's putting at the center of digital transformation the human being, the citizens, and their constitutional rights, their fundamental rights. And I think we should be celebrating it, but as it was said before, we have to implement these charters. So we have to make those charters real. We have to make those charters part of the daily life of citizens so that when we interact with digital services and technologies, we know this is actually happening, protecting our rights, solidarity and inclusion, freedom of choice, participation, safety and security, and sustainability. I think that what we are doing here, so the Interoperable Europe's Act, is a very central part of that. How do we make the European charters for digital rights real? How do we make them implementable? And I also really like that the interoperability is a governance model. So it's not just technical interoperability, but it's also an organizational interoperability, semantic interoperability, cultural interoperability, legal framework. So it's really about opening up governance and a shared approach. So it should be multi-state, it should be across all different levels of governments. And it's putting the public sector at the center. I mean, I work in the Institute for Innovation and Public Purpose with Professor Matsukato, and you know probably her work, which we always say, yes, actually the public sector can innovate, and it has always been an engine for innovation. We know that. So without the public sector being innovative and really taking a bold position, there is no innovative ecosystem. And this Interoperable Act is putting the public sector at the core of it. So how do we shape it? How do we make it happen? Of course, together. So it has to be a public, private, and civic ecosystem that's strong. But and this is the digital service standards, the digital ethical framework I built when I was a CTO of Barcelona in the past. And I mean, we built policies in Barcelona that were trying to apply it at a city level and scale it up. So I'll be quick here. I know I have not so much time. The new regulatory framework for Europe has been mentioned before. This is a new constitution for the digital age. I think we should be proud of it, because sometimes they say, oh, too much regulation, this is going to stifle innovation and so on. I believe the right regulation is going to help innovation to happen in a specific way. And I think those set of regulation, and now, you know, the Interoperable Act will be also there, and probably the AI Act, which is being negotiated as we speak now in Brussels. These are, of course, part of the solution, I think, but we are in the enforcement moment. So this has to be enforced also and implemented. At the very core of this strategy, I think there is the European strategy for data, to make it fair, a fair data economy, to increase, of course, data access and data sharing while preserving the trust of citizens and consumers. I think here Europe is going far. I mean, it is saying that we need in Europe to establish a different approach to data and data ownership and data rights, and give the people the rights over their data. So, you know, this is a big objective. So people can decide how to access data, for what purpose, and who should be able to access this data and on what terms. And so make it easier, of course, to share also data across borders while maintaining protection, security, privacy as a fundamental right, and transparency. And now we have, with the data spaces, the possibility to prototype and grow European data trusts, which are a different approach to data governance. I mean, you remember the slide before with data extractivism. Obviously, if we're serious about this different model for data ownership and data sovereignty, this can be also an alternative economic model around data. But you know that very well. And when I was the city of Barcelona, we did do a lot of work on giving citizens the capacity to understand the value of data that they can own and share, but also the public value of data. Because with data, you solve a lot of cities' problems. And for that, and this is governing urban data for the public interest, if you are interested, the report is online. This is a work I've been doing with the state of Hamburg to share private data with public sector and opening it up to the community, maintaining privacy, security, and ethics of data, but then also share it to create public value. And I mean, I know that this kind of work will happen much more in the future, because we need to get it right at the moment. So those are the key building blocks, I think, for the EU sovereign infrastructure. And they were mentioned also before. So we are building a digital ID, which should be attribute-based cryptography, so a digital identity wallet, giving the opportunity of people to control their identity, but also in a cryptographic way, so that we are more sovereign. We did it also during COVID. I don't know if you remember the interoperability around the COVID app, and this was done using cryptography at the very core. Then privacy-enhancing data infrastructure, decentralized data infrastructure with data spaces and privacy-enhancing solutions, but also new legal ways to share data between private and public sector, and then possibly a digital euro. And I know India has done something pretty similar in a sense with the stack, but the idea here is to put individuals in control, whether they keep their personal information private or they share it for the public good. And those infrastructure, what is the end goal is to create EU-wide interoperable digital public services that can be scaled across Europe. Now, you know, I mean, there are not many digital public services at the moment used by millions of European citizens. First, we have a lot of questions around the EU digital single market that we have to fix. But also, you know, we need examples that have real impact on the ground. I mean, it's not enough, really, and if any of you that works in a city council or in a public administration know, to go to your citizens and say, well, we care about privacy. Yes, we do care about privacy, but people care about mobility, climate, affordable housing. They care about a better life. So we need to give the kind of interoperable, open source, digital public services that will serve people in Europe, and make that also through the local digital twins, which I think it's a great opportunity for example, municipality and cities to be exchanging and reuse solutions, but also frameworks and also software and also really services that arrive to citizens. And I think the net zero cities is a great opportunity, and the climate mission cities, because we know we need to decarbonize, we know we have to have greener cities, more livable cities, transform mobility, transform the environment, and we need digital to do it. So we need those kind of interoperable EU-wide digital services. Another part of work, and I mean, there is the Decidim team in the room that will show what great achievements they have, for example, done with participatory democracy, open source platforms enabling the participation of citizens. This is, I think, a great and important part to reclaim a digital public sphere. And the Decidim platform was used for the Future of Europe proposals. And so we have now a platform that translated in all languages, which is used across the world, and that will really enable citizens to express priority, participate in political life, make decisions, but away from polarization and fake news, away from the manipulation of data during elections, away from disinformation. I mean, this is a fundamental democratic challenge that we're facing. So we need to scale and grow those kind of platforms. I see Mastodon here also promoting the social network. Yes, of course. I mean, a lot of European citizen data in the hands of X, a company that's not really governed according to democratic principles and standards. This is not good for European democracy. So yes, we do need alternatives, but we need those alternatives to be solid, to scale, to be used by millions and billions of people. So we need to invest now. So quick, I only have 2.5 minutes. But I just want to mention also this. I mean, this is the public sector, but this is also about cooperation, a different cooperation between public and private. In the digital industrial policy for the EU strategic autonomy, we have now billions of investments. This is our time now. This won't happen again soon. With Next Generation EU, with the Digital Europe program, Europe is investing around, I calculate around 400 billions in digitizing the continent at the moment, and also looking at 5G, cloud, the AI, the chips, you know, the Gaia X, which should be, I mean, if you look at how vulnerable we are with our data centers, how much we depend on foreign actors is around 90%. So this is really a problem. And then we have important projects of common European interest. But I wanted to emphasize one point about the digital industrial strategy, that now the Euro HPC, our high-performance computing infrastructure, which is one of the most important actually in the world, is been opening up and guaranteeing access to the AI startup community. And also should be happening for the open source community. Because this is a very important part, and this is part of the European AI Alliance. So including this kind of civic tech cooperation, but using our digital infrastructures that we are developing at the moment. Because anyways, if they are not used, if it's only used, of course, for scientific purpose and research, this is absolutely critical and important, but also it should be used by the community, by the developers, by the innovators, by the startups, and that's how we generate innovation. And then also for the EU innovation agenda, it was mentioned, I've just ended my 4 years term as the president of the Italian National Innovation Fund. It's a 5 billion investment in EU startups and scale-ups. There is a lot happening there. We are investing 10 billion with the European Innovation Council and also with the European Investment Fund. And, you know, we know that we need to create deep tech champions in Europe, that we need to create technological capabilities in Europe. But I think that decentralized open source community has a lot to say there. And also, if we really focus on open technology transfer, open source, data sovereignty, and privacy-preserving standards. And finally, we know, of course, we need to invest in education, to have good jobs, to have more skills, to have gender equality, because it's still a massive problem. And if we don't invest in education, and if we don't invest, for example, in rights for workers in this digital and automation transformation, we won't really achieve it. So these are the recommendations, so I don't even have time to mention them, but those are my takeaways. I mean, for me, this is how do we implement this strategy? I think we should talk about this in this conference. It's not so much what the strategy is. We actually know what the strategy is. I think it's on the right path, but how do we make it work? And I just want to mention two things here. I think we need, obviously, to have more native, made-in-Europe tech products that are suited to European condition, preferences, and values. For example, ethical standard setting. We can use subsidies, which are directed in a specific way, public procurement, and also investment in equity. So we have a lot of instruments. But how do we make, for example, open source and data sovereignty and privacy obligation in procurement agreements, in public tenders? How do we make conditional to obtain public financing or public funding? We try to do some of that around Europe, for example, in public procurement, adding open source clauses, adding data sovereignty clauses. Can we do that at a European level? Can the EU Interoperable Act help us to do it in a European way? And then, for example, how do we grow interoperable public digital services with strong options to have open source interoperable marketplaces to solve energy, climate, to improve our cities, for citizen participation? Those apps can then plug in local tax, local labor rules, and licensing rules. So we have a real kind of European digital single market. But finally, let me tell you, I can't not tell you this, we are at the European Commission. We need larger funding for this. I think we have a lot of examples here that are doing great work, but still it's very dispersed, it's fragmented, it's too small. So why don't we create a large EU digital sovereignty fund, maybe learning from Germany, but make it 100 times bigger, a 10 billion EU digital sovereignty fund to scale those smaller and fragmented national and EU initiatives using blended finance, so grants, but also equity investments, and coordinating in Europe across innovation agencies and foundations. So it will be also a governance model that we need to get right. So those are my recommendations to move from a digital future that now is basically have two alternatives, the big tech in Silicon Valley and the big state in China. But can we actually have a big democracy? And can Europe be part of building this big democracy as a third way, as a different model? The European way of digital transformation and innovation should be based on our values, of course, and human rights, and the democratic digitalization should be Europe's goal. It is the right time to advance a model of European digital sovereignty that guarantees our strategic autonomy, competitiveness, but also full participation of citizens and workers, protect the environment and our data, and the fundamental rights of people. So I leave it here on a very positive note, and I think we are here all together to build this agenda and make it happen on the ground. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Professor. Please don't go anywhere, because, Professor, while you were speaking, lots of people were sending in their ideas and their questions, so don't go away too quickly. Okay. We have some stuff for you. Many of the ideas were actually for the policymakers that we'll try to take in the next panel, but there was at least one question that I wanted to push in your direction. If we can have it on the screen, that would be easier, because you spoke a lot about the macro state level, and some of the viewers were wondering about the city level. You can see it now on your comfort screen here. What should cities do to collaborate on open source? They have very similar needs, and they replicate similar efforts. So from the state, from Europe to the state to the city local level. Yeah.
No, great. I mean, that has been my work for a long time, working with cities in Barcelona, but also with the UN program on digital cities and digital rights, which I helped build. So I have experience now with the state of Hamburg, which is actually a city and a state, and I find it pretty interesting. So I stressed on the different level of governance, and I think also with the Dutch municipalities, because I see people here that you've done a great work that we've been looking at. But I think that's why I stress on this multiple level, because I think that's really how Europe is made. So we need to start actually bottom up. I think ground up city cooperation is key because it's closer to the citizens, it has proximity, you can do test beds, I mean, you can scale concrete solutions on the ground. So I'm a big fan of that, making experimentation happen in public policy, which is a big word and a big thing to do. So make experimentation, but then we need to scale it. So we need to scale it at national level, and then it's the EU level that needs to happen to really harmonize things. But I think just getting more concrete, I think implementing policies, for example, in procurement, it's very important because there you can really have an obligation for the city's administration to implement open source and free software, which is also an economic policy. Because think about it, all the big procurement contracts go in the same hands. I mean, there are only few players, so the market is becoming smaller. So how can we enable, much more cooperatives, also, open source developers to access public funding? And then I would say create capacity, create culture, create, that in the public sector. I mean, this is a big part of it, because of course, you have to do agile development, you have to work in a different way, so it's a cultural shift, it's an organizational mindset, and also how to collaborate. So how do we make public sector collaborating with open source companies and open source communities, but also with universities and research centers, for example. They have a lot of facilities and infrastructures that have capacity to develop and build software and data and so on. So how do we make this collaboration happen in an effective way? Sure. I really dream, if I can say, public procurement of European cities with those standards happening at the same time. Do we have examples? I don't know, but that would be fantastic.
Public procurement of cities across Europe, joining forces,
joining forces, but also, because otherwise we spend a lot of money to build products that could be scaled and reused, as we see in the examples of the open source communities. Those are the great examples. I've done a software in Barcelona, used also in Helsinki, in Amsterdam, in Milan, here and there, scaling up all of a sudden. So how do we align public procurement to this?